welcome to the Waterpeople Podcast. I'm Lauren Hill and
I'm Dave Rastovich.
and we're tuning in from our cozy little culture club. That's what we call our little office space on a blustery winter's day in Australia.
That's right, the Culture Club, the place where we pretend to be knowledgeable about stuff.
We're hoping it'll help us here.
Yeah, we got lots of books around us so that we can try and imbibe some of their wisdom and understanding. But it's just a crappy little office in the corner of our house.
Yeah, the corners aren't finished, and there's a lot of cobwebs in here now that I stop and look at it.
But it's an inspiring place. It's definitely a place for us to have ideas and to explore concepts and reminisce about travels and dream about future adventures. Lauren and I would like to thank Gary McNeil Concepts for his awesome surfboards and support of the podcast, and also Sanook Footwear for being fun, silly, awesome supporters of Waterpeople. A big thanks to Shannon Carroll for his editing and his audio skills and great ears. So yeah, here we are in our little nook, and it makes me wonder why we're doing this. Why are we doing this, Lauren? What made you want to do a podcast?
I guess it's been a long time coming and really stems from the fact that I very rarely have seen my experience of surfing reflected back to me from mainstream surf media. I grew up surfing in a time that was really rich with surfing media, especially women's surf media, but it was always kind of segregated from men's magazines and media sources. And then those kind of fell away in into the middle 2000s. And I always thought that mainstream men's magazines would sort of pick up the slack and absorb women's surf culture because there weren't any media outlets really like depicting our culture and pulling us into what being a surfer looks like. But it hasn't really happened as quickly as I'd hoped. I always hoped that the staple magazines would catch on and start including more women and more elders and really depicting the diverse facets of our culture, but it's really happening much more slowly than I would have expected. So I wanted to create a platform to listen to and share stories across genders and generations, spanning watery disciplines and nationalities to talk about the intricacies of living a life largely dedicated to being in, around, and underwater. I grew up being expected to eventually stop doing this kind of silly, superfluous surfing thing. My parents were always like, all right, when are you going to get a real job? When are you going to quit doing this thing that's taking up all your time and your energy and your mental capacity because you're exhausted at the end of the day from surfing too much? Like, when are you going to stop doing this? I caught my first stand-up surfing a wave when I was like 13 after I'd had this really vivid dream about flying down the face of a wave, and pretty much from that moment on, I was hooked. I borrowed a board the next day and got pushed into my first wave, and I just knew it was for me. Being in the ocean was for me. Watching and learning from water was just where I belonged, and I knew it. From when I was a teenager. And I can really honestly say that almost all of the best things in my life have come from staying committed to that calling of sticking close to the ocean and to surfing. So part of the reason for a podcast is to keep asking questions of people who know a whole lot more and who know much better than I do about this watery life and what it means. Like, what does it mean to live well? How do we move forward as a culture in a way that's responsible and engaged and respectful of people and the planet? What about you? Why did you want to start a podcast?
Wow. Well, those are all amazing things to hear from you, and to hear that you have such a desire to see the kind of surfing and the kind of things that you're so passionate about acknowledged and respected and explored in the surfing industry and culture and our media. And so I really get that. It's easy for someone like me, a white male who's athletic enough or whatever and can surf well enough, to see myself and people like me, to make me feel part of a community and a part of a like-minded group. It's so easy for me to see all of that around me. So it's great to just have a moment of clarity like this where you share such an insight that it's not the same for you, and that there's lots of people in surfing that don't feel like their part of the culture has the time of day and the light shine upon it. So that's really at the core of my desire to do this podcast as well. It's in a totally different way, but it's similar in that sense of just wanting to acknowledge all the different facets of the surfing organism, because it's fun. It's so fun. And over the years, so fortunate of being able to travel around the world, chasing seasons and posting up in places and making friends all over this watery world, that there are so many great storytellers in our culture. There's so many cool elders who we can learn from. Like, just think about some of the old cats that we've hung out with who still have a sparkle in their eye, like they're teenagers or younger even, and they're in their 70s or plus, still in the water all the time, and just have such a buoyancy and bright light about them. I want to know how they're doing that. I want to do that too. And then, you know, the artistry and the intellect of so many other surfers. There's just so much to explore. And our good fortune of being able to travel around and meet, you know, a snippet of these people in our culture feels like a kind of a responsibility to share that with others. And just a joy too, because it's just like, oh my God, that was an amazing story. I wish everyone could have heard how you've maintained a surfing life through such challenge and through such adversity. You've stayed buoyant, you know. So I think that's really at the heart of it for me, just being able to share the joy that we've experienced through sitting around campfires, sitting under the stars, sitting out the back in a line-up with people all over the world.
Yeah, the story. There's not as much time, it feels like, for really genuine eye contact, body tingling storytelling experiences as there used to be. And I feel that longing in me. Like, I get so absorbed in someone when they're really telling a story that they know deep in their bones. It sweeps you away. Another reason to start the podcast had to do with making space to really dive into the big questions of life with people who we feel like have lived really beautiful, engaged, exciting, adventurous lives and have made great meaning out of them. And also as a reminder of the difference between connectivity and connection. We're connected on devices all day long, and I know I have to keep reminding myself that this is not the same thing as real human connection. It doesn't mean my need for genuinely connecting with other human beings is being met. Ideally, this happens face-to-face, looking into another person's eyes, having real conversations with space for vulnerability and lightness and laughter and depth and sharing pain and suffering and, you know, the whole gamut, the whole spectrum of human experience, you know, with depth and lightness. But our community is scattered all over the world now.
Yeah, it's totally a new shape and form to our surfing culture. The way we all share information, the way we can chat from across the world at any moment. But you're right, there are fewer and fewer actual moments face-to-face happening than ever before. And people are working harder and harder than any time in human history, despite all of our great technological advancements that are meant to make our lives easier. You know, nearly everyone I know is attached to their phone 24 hours a day and responding to emails 7 days a week and phone calls 7 days a week. And we're all working really, really hard. And so I feel like it's even more important to surf, and it's even more important to talk about surfing or the ocean or diving or sailing or gardening or all these things that have a real playful tone to them when our world is getting so serious and so workaholic and 24/7. And an opportunity to sit around like we would have around the campfire or on the shore of a lineup may not be accessible all the time. And that's where something like this comes in. It's like, okay, well, let's have these conversations still, but we can use another medium. And maybe it's a bit of a desperate plea at this point in time to each other to stay connected and stay in a related space with each other. Like, not just, you know, passing by on our busy way from A to B.
Or not, averting your eyes in the lineup, not making eye contact. I feel like that's such a common experience of surfing now.
Yeah, but that's a funny one because some of us love to do that. And I'm talking straight about myself right here.
I know who you mean.
Yeah, I mostly for me, when I go surfing, I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to be in the human world. I'm disappearing into the water because that's where I feel like I belong the most and have a moment for my mind to melt away, wash away, and words are no longer relevant. But when I come back to shore, it's so fun to talk about surfing or talk about board design or just hear people's stories and use words and concepts and try and wrap my head around this big experience. And that's also part of this whole deal with the podcast, is that kind of playful exploration of trying to rationalize something as irrational as surfing. We're trying to encapsulate something so big as the ocean and water.
One of the things I love the most about you is how full of questions you are. Partly,
What do you mean?
I think probably it makes me feel a little bit less annoying because I have so many questions. But also I feel like it keeps life so fresh. It shakes the dust out of the routine that you can really easily get set in, especially with a young baby, and you just get locked into logistics, and the mundane can really sweep you up and set you on a course that's far from where you were beforehand. But the process of asking questions, I think there's a lot of magic in that. And that process, over the course of this season, asking questions to this group of inspiring water people has really helped me peek outside of our little baby bubble.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's I'm hearing you big time, because there is that baby bubble thing that happens when you have a new family. Like
and
we
sleep
have a
deprivation.
new family. Yeah.
God, nothing prepares you for that.
Yeah. Well, maybe sailing. Some of our adventures in the past have
Oh, yeah.
had a little snippet of that.
That is finite comparatively. We're going on like 700 nights of interrupted sleep. And speaking of our little guy, most of the recordings we're doing during his nap time, and he's just in the next room over. So if it ever sounds like we're kind of whispering while we're recording, it's because we're kind of whispering.
Yeah, it's true.
And on that note, we definitely must admit that we're total novices with audio recording and engineering, and that we've made about 1 million mistakes along the way during this first season, so our apologies. You'll hear some electrical appliances in the background sometimes, some rogue nose whistles.
Why are you looking at me when you said that?
and some interviews you won't even hear at all because we forgot to hit record.
Yes, this is true.
So there's kind of 2 parts to each episode. The first is an in-depth story from each water person about a time or experience after which they were never the same. We never set any rules about it having to be about the water at all, but it pretty much always is about the water, or about a time that the water changed the course of their life or the way that they thought about being human in the world. And I think that really speaks to the power of the experiences we have, the humbling, scary, thrilling aquatic adventures that shape our lives in ways that we can hardly articulate sometimes, or really that we hardly even notice until we're asked to stop and reflect on them. Mm-hmm. We're these like strange creatures that prey on mounds of accumulating sand along shorelines around the world to try to match the forward motion of energy waves for just a few short seconds, and we end up with absolutely nothing to show for it. We shirk responsibilities, we quit our jobs, ruin relationships, miss weddings and birthdays to do this bizarre thing called surfing. And it makes life so wonderful.
Yeah, isn't it great? I think of the Tom Robbins line about art and how meaningless, purpose, or maybe not meaningless, it was more purposeless, that, you imagine your house or the world with no art hanging on the walls, and it's a pretty dreary place, And I think about surfing in such a similar way. It's like, yeah, you could stop surfing and still have a house over your head and food in your belly and friends and many, many other things to fill time. But would it be as fun?
The second part of each episode is fleshing out some of the themes and ideas from the story that we hear from the storyteller and seeing where the conversation takes us. And yeah, we try to dip into some of the big themes that are really important to us: ecology, activism, what's going on in terms of scientific research, learning how to play for longer and better, where we get our food from, adventure, big adventures.
Yeah, big adventure.
Challenge, fear, reckoning with fear.
Yeah, design, concepts of how to experience the ocean through what kind of medium, what kind of artistry, and, you know, like someone like Derek Hine, you know, getting to sit down with Derek and hear little tiny snippets from his outrageous mind is just such a treat and so fun, you know, like calling Mickey Dora spasmodic, that his style spasmodic. That's unbelievable. That's just hilarious stuff, you know, and they're the kind of things that you can get out of these moments of just diving a little deeper with someone and going a little further than just a sort of surface level chat about how the waves have been and how you doing and that kind of thing.
Yeah, Derek Hine's conversation was really exciting for me. He is such a wealth of story from within, like right in the heart of surfing culture. But he is actually also a wealth of knowledge about women's surfing, and no one ever asks him about women's surfing. And so we got to have this conversation. I think it's episode 5. But he boils the gender performance gap between men's and women's surfing down to one single changeable element, and that I found that really exciting. Some of the other highlights for me were Kimmy Werner's dive into the nature of fear and panic and how it's often the opposite of our instincts. That's actually the right thing to do. Like she talks about when she's swimming with big predators, big fish, you know, instead of swimming away when they seem kind of aggressive, you have to swim right toward them and match their energy. And that really reminded me of the Seinfeld episode we watched the other night about opposite George. It's an episode called The Opposite. So George Costanza, he's this like dopey,
neurotic,
yeah,
very stressed,
character,
flailing character.
He decides that his life is so pathetic because all of his instincts have been completely wrong, and Jerry Seinfeld then convinced him that if every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right. And so then he goes about trying the opposite of everything he's ever felt like was right. And that's kind of what Kimmy is asking us to do in a small way. It's like flip the script on the way our culture has raised us to think about sharks, about fear in general, and definitely about the way we think about food. That was cool. That was a great conversation for me.
Yeah. So George flipped it and he started wearing full body velvet outfits, purple velvet. Are you saying that you're going to do something like that?
I actually did just get a velvet
I know,
suit.
That's right.
So yes, some of the other big questions that we touch on during season 1 are living with addiction. In episode 10 with Jake McKenzie, he talks about getting sober after a spiritual awakening. We sit with shark girl Madison Stewart and talk about her compassionate approach to shark conservation and also, and I found this really interesting, research-based strategies for avoiding encounters with big fish in the lineup. She has a tangible guide called The Australian Guide to Surfing with Sharks. What about you? What else was interesting for you?
I have a real soft spot for Mark Healy's stories because I've seen him in the water and some heavy water situations around the world, and you know, anyone who's been with him in those moments knows that he is, you know, one of the world's leading deep water extreme wave aficionados, just a classic character. So that was really great to be able to hear his applied wisdom of those experiences, that when he comes back to shore from those moments in heavy water, be it diving or big waves, what he's learnt and felt out there, he applies to daily life on land. And it's really neat to hear.
I was really blown away
of that,
by how philosophical he is and how thoughtful and prepared he is with all of his sort of risky...
Yeah, it's great. I think people will get a real kick out of that,
the
range of his personality in that way.
The reason I really wanted to have a podcast together is because I feel like we're kind of representative of the spectrum of surfing, right? I love small waves, big, heavy longboards, really subtle, kind of slow motion surfing. And you're at the exact other end of that. And so we wanted to bring a male and a female voice together to reflect on the experiences that we have in common and the differing experiences that we have that we can learn from for each other.
Yeah, and I wanted to do it in that way. I think it's really good because you make me sound smarter. And that's really hard because I'm quite slow. So thank you for helping me in that way. Although I kind of blew it because I just put that out up front there and I should have done that at the end so people think I'm smart through the whole
Well, this is the end
series.
of the episode, so you did pretty well.
Okay, I got a few minutes in there where people might think I'm all right.
Oh, gosh, and we got to talk to Liz Clark. I feel like she's like surfing culture's spirit animal to kick the mundane habits of daily life and set off on a boat toward the horizon, like foraging food and rescuing stray animals along the way.
Yeah.
She's so inspiring and offers so many great little bits of wisdom from her 10 years of sailing pretty much solo.
Yeah, and a great way to articulate those experiences as a writer now and just a great communicator. You know, there's a lot of people who are having big adventures out there in the world, but they're either still out in the deep blue or perhaps don't have that way of communicating articulately the range of sensations and experiences and insights from such an adventure. And she's really got that. That's so fun to sit and talk story, but mostly listen to Liz.
And I think the season has complete gender equality, 50% men, 50% women. And we tried to really keep that even. And I'm looking forward to hopefully pursuing another season and pulling in more elders, especially female elders and people of color too. Yeah, and just trying to expand this definition of what it means to be a water person.
Yeah, this just can keep going and going forever when we think about how our culture is growing. You know, we're this global network of people who live, as Howie Cook says, at the edge of the ocean, not the edge of the land. And so there's all these great stories being lived every day, new stories. And hopefully we can keep tapping into those and being a window into that world for other people and to strengthen and really bolster our sense of community together, and that we're not alone, even though we might feel like we're in our tiny little pockets of coastal areas or islands. We do belong to a really big collective of people who care about these amazing places, have a lot to share and a lot to say about living a life this way, and perhaps how to perpetuate it and pass it on to the next generation and so on.
What makes living a life focused or guided by water different than people who don't live that way?
Yeah, isn't it interesting? Because we have a few friends who, not many, but we have a few who are totally not coastal people, totally aren't surfers, and who trip on how flimsy we are in the human world. We're
So
really
flaky.
flaky, you know, and just sort of, they're bamboozled by the fact that we're just always fixed on the weather and our local ecology. And I just feel like that's the magic. That's the thing for us that we have, where we never have a moment of being directionless in life. We know where we are at all times. And I can speak for us here. I don't know about other surfers down the road or whatever, but, you know, right now we know that the tide just went low and it's coming in. We know that it's just been a new moon, that the wind's east, the swell's east and lumpy, but there's a change coming. There's some high cloud and some low cloud, and we know where the pockets of sand are along the coast. And all of these little things contribute to, yes, the experience of getting good waves whenever you feel like you want to go surfing, but also just being somewhere. We are somewhere. We're here among this place.
It's about a sense of place, isn't it?
It's not a state of mind only. It is a state of mind, but it is also deeply, because we're these human animals here, it is where we are. We're here. We feel that salty air on the hairs on our arms and our skin and our cheeks or our lips, and we see the light, and it's all this beautiful interactive experience of place, of just being somewhere, belonging somewhere.
As a culture, we've tended to move away from that, haven't we? Like, I grew up in a subdivision that was pretty much all paved in concrete, and I would have struggled to tell you what a native plant looked like or that food didn't come from a grocery store, or, to pay attention to the wind and, understand the weather outside of watching the news like that. I don't know, we've just moved away from understanding the place and understanding ourselves as deeply connected to the rhythms and what's going on all around us, and in conjunction with the other beings that live around us. And surfing gives us this incredible outlet to reconnect all the time.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, there's...
Or not, or it can be the total opposite of that too.
Yeah,
it can
the range
be full
is there.
Party mode, totally disrespectful. Surfing is just a tool. It can be a spiritual experience, or it can be a totally selfish experience, and most of the time it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, I gotta say, my key mentor as a grommet, Dick Van Stralen, was so influential on me, and he, as a grom, he would always tell me that music and surfing are the same. Surfing is just like music. It has that range where it can be like computer music, pop music, and sporty and, commodified and commercial. It can be slow and orchestral and like a symphony. When you look at someone who's perhaps in their older years surfing gracefully, or, a simple, beautiful orchestral piece of music. There's so much range in surfing, and I feel like the surfing music analogy is really accurate in that way. It's like none of them are better or worse than the other. We all just dance to a different tune, and they can really be complementary, and occasionally they can cross over, and there can be these like mixtape things that happen. But that range is just beautiful and to be celebrated. And it's wonderful that we have elders in our culture that can give us that perspective, because they've lived through all of these decades of, surfing reinventing itself in all these different ways, and see that, it is different, but underneath it is riding waves, and it is being a part of local ecology.
And just to clarify, we talk a lot about surfing because our lives are, really revolve around surfing. But the podcast, the Waterpeople Podcast, is really about trying to pull in other water people in other disciplines of exploring the water, free diving, spearfishing, snowboarding. That we have a story from a former U.S. national champion skier. He tells a story in the Water People Live episode. Swimmers, scientists. We want to pull in as many people as we can to build this community and all communicate about this way of life that we kind of collectively feel is worth living.
Also, for those who have been with us this far, we are joining up with our sponsors, Sanook and Gary McNeil Concepts, to give one lucky listener a quiver of comfy footwear and a brand new Gaza surfboard. We'll announce more about that as the season progresses, so stay tuned.
If you have any questions or comments or suggestions for someone we should interview, or if you yourself want to share a story, please don't hesitate to get in touch.
You can DM us on Instagram, where we are at Waterpeople, or you can get a hold of us via the website, which is waterpeoplepodcast.com. I nailed it. I did pretty good then.